In a neighborhood known for its strong community ties, the day began like any other. Neighbors were already on the sidewalk, chatting about the weather and sharing gardening tips while dogs ran off leash. But the tranquility was about to be shattered by a series of discoveries that would transform the peaceful landscape into a scene of distrust and mystery. It all started with an anonymous message left in the mailbox of Sarah, the oldest resident of the area. She thought it was just another pesky advertisement, but upon opening the envelope, she found a sinister warning about surveillance devices hidden in the common areas. Intrigued, Sarah convened an emergency meeting with the neighbors. The meeting was packed, every chair occupied, and the air was thick with tension. People whispered to each other, casting curious and suspicious glances around. Without wasting time, Sarah began to discuss the matter. "We need to investigate these allegations now," she suggested firmly, looking at faces full of doubts and growing fears. It was hard to believe that something so strange was happening right under their noses, but there was an urgency in the atmosphere that made everyone uncomfortable. In pairs and trios, the neighbors spread out across the neighborhood's common areas, hoping to discover if there was any basis for the rumors. The playground, the picnic areas, the small park, always illuminated by the joy of children, were now being examined like crime scenes. It was then that Marco, one of the youngest in the neighborhood, found something peculiar, a small camera camouflaged inside the wooden support of one of the swings. "Here's one," he exclaimed as he hurried to show the find to the others, his face a mixture of fear and excitement. Throughout the day, other covert transmissions came to light, increasing the tension among the residents. With each new device found, the trust they shared seemed to wear away even further. Who could have done this? To make matters worse, it was Maria, a local real estate agent, who proposed a disturbing theory. "What if it's one of the developers?" she suggested, stirring up old resentments about investors trying to turn those residential streets into lucrative commercial ventures. The assumptions revolved around the same figure, a developer who had been trying to acquire properties in the neighborhood for years, always pushing the limits of what was acceptable. As night fell, the suspicions took shape. João, neighbor who worked in a security technology company, confirmed the suspicions by analyzing one of the devices. "This is professional equipment," he stated, showing the small inscription of a company associated with the infamous real estate developer. As the sun disappeared on the horizon, the sense of security that once defined the neighborhood was replaced by a cloud of distrust. Each neighbor began to guard their words and gestures, fearing that any detail could be used against them. In such an environment, friendships were tested. Many questioned the true intentions of their acquaintances, while others were worried about having been watched for so long without knowing. The morning of the next day brought a false calm to the neighborhood. The cameras were left in a box as evidence and taken to the local police station. With that, the investigative cycle began, but official responses could take time to arrive. Meanwhile, the neighborhood tried to move on. They tried to return to normalcy, but it was impossible to forget the distressing feeling of having lost something precious: mutual trust. The news covered the story briefly, but as the days turned into weeks, public interest dissipated, leaving the residents with unanswered questions. More devices were found, but the exact motivations were never revealed. A new rumor emerged, mentioning that the developer had been approached with legal questions, but without definitive confirmations, everything was just conjecture. Life went on, but cold and silent nights still brought back the echo of insecurity. When someone new moved into the neighborhood, whispers about the unresolved mystery circulated, like an urban legend that insisted on haunting. The quiet streets were never the same, and although the sun rose every morning, each day began with a silent reminder that even the greatest bonds can be tested by well-kept secrets. At the end of that fateful day, there remained a bitter reminder of how fear and suspicion can break the strongest ties. The truth is that sometimes it's not about the answers we get, but the questions we continue to ask. The neighborhood returned to its apparent calm, but the inescapable feeling that someone might still be watching persisted, an enigma silenced but never completely forgotten. As the initial outcry subsided, the neighborhood found itself navigating a sea of uncertainty and silent surveillance. The sense of normalcy had been eroded, replaced by an almost palpable paranoia that hung in the air. Casual encounters in the park and on street corners became exercises in containment, where words were measured and glances were exchanged with a mixture of complicity and suspicion. The constant feeling of being watched turned even the most common gestures into carefully choreographed rituals. The police investigation proceeded slowly, following the tortuous paths of a bureaucracy that seemed oblivious to the urgency the residents felt. Community meetings became more frequent, but less warm. There were always one or two members missing, opting to retreat into their homes, where drawn curtains offered a false sense of security. Whispers about the real estate developer persisted, but now entered the realm of conspiracy theories. While verifiable facts were scarce, news of the discovery spread beyond the neighborhood's borders, reaching nearby areas. This brought an influx of reporters and curious onlookers, their cameras and intrusive questions adding a new layer of stress to the already tense residents. Sarah, who had inadvertently become a spokesperson for the neighborhood, was overwhelmed. Her determination to protect her community was admirable, but she now faced a battle on two fronts. One, against the invisible threat of surveillance devices, and another against the growing distrust that eroded the group's cohesion. In an effort to regain some semblance of control, residents decided to search their own homes for any additional devices. Tension increased when some of them revealed that they had found small cameras hidden in places that had previously been considered private. The invasive presence of these eyes made the simple task of being at home a constant reminder of the violation. Despite security improvements, such as the installation of alarm systems and increased presence of night guards, the feeling of vulnerability persisted. The invasion was not only physical, but emotional. The neighborhood, which had once been a haven of camaraderie and solidarity, became a field of distrust. Unexpectedly one day, an anonymous letter was delivered to Sarah. Inside, an ambiguous, handwritten confession revealed that a resentful accomplice of the developer had planted some of the cameras, but assumed responsibility only for the most recent installations. However, there was no mention of when this surveillance had begun or if it was still ongoing. The letter ended with an almost cynical apology, as if the author wanted more to alleviate their own guilt than to offer any true regret. Many wondered about the authenticity of that letter, whether it was a genuine gesture or part of a perverse game. Without enough information to act, but with a renewed awareness of their own safety and privacy, residents found themselves forced to continue with their lives as best they could. Then, on a cool autumn night, as the leaves danced in the wind, the familiarity of the neighborhood slowly began to repair its cracks. The children returned to the parks, the dogs barked happily in the mornings, and the neighbors, despite being vigilant, shared glances of silent understanding. But in place of comforting silence, every corner and shadow guarded a silent mystery, a persistent reminder that not everything was resolved. Those devices might be deactivated, but their impact would reverberate for a long time. A constant reminder that sometimes threats come from the least expected places. Certainly, let's explore more deeply the impact that these events had on the community, delving deeper into the lives of the residents and the relationships that were shaken. By expanding the story, we can follow the emotional and practical unfolding of events, After the revelation of the spy cameras, the community of the neighborhood transformed into a stage of informal surveillance, where each movement was recorded not by electronic devices, but by the attentive eyes of the residents themselves. They became their own guardians, the most attentive eyes than the hidden cameras. Observant aunts and retired gentlemen now spent more time on the balconies, cautioning each other about any suspicious activity. The once unshakable trust between friends and families in the neighborhood was fragmented into irregular shards, difficult to glue back together. In Sarah's house, which had become the informal nerve center of the neighborhood's resistance, the windows were constantly open, but conversations were kept in whispers, as if the walls were endowed with ears. Community meetings, once occasions of festivity and friendship, became ceremonies of mutual assurance and news reports. Each piece of evidence found, each furtive glance from a stranger, was dissected and analyzed with surgical precision. The sense of normalcy swept away by the incident persisted like a shadow over daily activities. Local markets, once vibrant with the noise of casual conversations, gained tones of subtle anxiety. Merchants complained of declining sales as residential neighbors were hesitant to venture beyond their fences without urgent need. The children, in an attempt to understand what was happening, created their own narratives, games filled with imaginary spies and secrets to be unraveled. Marco, who first found a camera, became a kind of hero to his friends, but also carried an invisible burden of fear, the constant doubt about what would have happened if he had not been so observant. His pride was mixed with an underlying anxiety, echoing the old existential question, how well do you really know your surroundings? With the knowledge that the cameras were part of a larger scheme, a new determination arose among the residents. They decided to undertake more coordinated actions. A neighborhood lawyer, specializing in real estate rights, began to conduct meetings to arm the group with the tools necessary to confront the developer. The movement flourished from a defensive effort to a hostile campaign against those who threatened their peace. Articulations about possible legal actions hung in the air, creating a tense expectation that mingled with the persistent determination of the residents. They studied local laws, consulted public documents, and mapped the transactions of recent years to understand the developers' patterns and strategies. Some began to collaborate with independent investigative journalists, hoping to stimulate media coverage and attract broader public support. In the dead of night, when the temperature dropped and silence took over, the neighbors wondered about the longevity of their effort. Conversations overflowed on the dining table, distorting into hypothetical scenarios of an uncertain future. Could the developers' villainy be contained, or would they be forced to give up their homes and legacy to the relentless jaws of real estate development? The days turned into weeks, and the focus of the public diminished while other news dominated the headlines. However, the residents kept their efforts ongoing, driven by an almost missionary fervor. They knew that they could not simply let time heal the open wounds, but had to be architects of their own future. Mixing stubborn acceptance with renewed resilience, they began to rebuild the foundations of their community, determined to protect what remained of their worn bond. A new solidarity emerged, built on top of the rubble of the old fear. It was a solidarity of precaution and awareness, where voices again echoed in the corridors of the small local market, and the children, once frightened, returned to play without fear, their laughter scattered and renewed. They established rotating watch systems and installed their own security systems, persuaded that the greatest resistance arose in a community way. Over time, the shadows of the hidden cameras were erased by the light of a more united, stronger, and more vigilant community. They not only survived, but flourished under the weight of their shared past. Distrust gave way to an unwavering commitment to guard each other, and as the sun set over the houses that now breathed relief, it became clear that although the battle was far from over, They had taken a vital step towards renewed security and a more guaranteed future. The mystery of the cameras was never completely solved, but the collective strength of the residents cemented itself as a discourse of resistance against oppressive forces. With views of the horizon, they were left only with the hope that, in the uncertain journey ahead, their story would incite courage and ensure everyone that they were more than the model of a safe neighborhood. They were the embodiment of vigilance personified.